The arena had been built for one purpose, and every living thing inside it understood that purpose before the first gate opened. It was not justice. It was not war. It was not even sport, no matter how many banners the owners hung above the killing floor. It was a theater of suffering, carved into black stone and bright metal, surrounded by millions of watching eyes. And tonight the seats were filled beyond capacity because the announcers had promised something rare. They had promised humans. Not one human, 5 of them. Survivors from the shattered border colonies. Prisoners taken after the burning of Vera's Reach. Low in number, valuable in fear and famous across half the civilized sectors for refusing to die quietly. Ethan Ward stood in the center of the arena with iron cuffs locked around his wrists and a shock collar pressed tight against his throat. The sand beneath his boots was already stained from earlier matches. Above him, the crowd roared in layers, some voices clicking, some shrieking, some chanting in languages the translator refused to clean into anything civilized. He did not look at them. He looked at the gate ahead. His face was bruised. One eye was swollen. His gray prison shirt was torn across the shoulder. Still, he stood straight, quiet, and almost painfully still. Behind him, Mason Cross shifted from one foot to the other and looked up at the crowd. "Good news," Mason said. "At least they gave us a big room." Ethan did not turn. "Stop talking." Mason glanced at the locked weapons rack near the wall. "Bad news, they forgot hospitality." Ethan turned then, slowly, and the look on his face made the smaller human beside him go still. "My wife died on her knees," Ethan said, his voice low enough that only the humans near him heard it. "My daughter was holding her hand. So if you need to hear yourself be funny, do it after we survive." Mason's mouth closed. For once he had nothing ready. Sarah Holt, the medic, stepped between them without touching either man. "Enough," she said. "Save it for whatever comes through that gate." Owen Briggs, older than all of them and built like a tired wall, gave one short nod. Beside him, Mara Vale checked the cracked brace around her wrist and whispered, "They want us angry." Ethan looked back at the gate. Then they paid well. High above the arena, Director Kaylor Voss smiled from the owner's balcony as the crowd's noise fed into revenue screens beside him. He was sleek, silver-skinned, and dressed in ceremonial black, the color of luxury death. "Observe the lead male," he said to his investors. "No begging, no panic, no visible hope, excellent product." Several nobles laughed. One did not. Prince Kalen sat 2 seats behind the main railing. Young by royal standards, pale gold robes folded perfectly, hands tight around the armrests. He had attended because refusal would have insulted the ruling houses that funded the arena. But he had hated the place before the humans were dragged in. Prisoners were not meant to be sold as entertainment. No species, defeated or not, deserved to be reduced to ticket value. When Ethan looked up briefly, Kalen felt the human's gaze pass over the royal box. It was not pleading. That made it worse. The announcer's voice rolled across the arena like thunder. "Citizens of the inner sectors, honored nobles, beloved patrons, tonight you witness the first trial of the human captives. 5 survivors from a broken colony. 5 remnants of a dangerous breed. And by dawn perhaps fewer." The crowd erupted. The gate in front of Ethan began to rise. Across the sand, another gate opened at the same time and 3 armored fighters stepped out. They were not beasts. They were trained arena killers, tall, plated, and armed with hooked blades. Voss leaned forward, pleased. "Let us see if the legends bleed." The shock collars clicked open at the wrists but stayed active at the throat. A weapon rack unlocked behind the humans. Owen grabbed a heavy bar. Mara took a short blade. Sarah took nothing at first, then picked up a shield because she understood the kind of work she was really there to do. Mason lifted a spear, tested the balance, and muttered, "I miss tools." Tools usually don't want speeches. Ethan took no weapon immediately. He watched the 3 opponents spread out. They expected fear. They expected desperate animals. Ethan gave them silence. The first attacker rushed Mason, probably choosing him because his hands shook. Ethan moved before the crowd could cheer properly. He stepped across the sand, caught the attacker's wrist with both hands, twisted hard, and drove him down with a speed that made the front rows fall quiet. The blade skidded away. Ethan picked it up and turned toward the other two. There was nothing elegant in him, no flourish, no performance. He fought like a man removing obstacles from a burning hallway. The second fighter tried to circle Sarah. Ethan cut him off. The third struck at Owen's back. Mara shouted and Owen barely turned in time. The blade hit his bar with a sound like breaking metal. Mason lunged then, messy but brave, driving his spear between them long enough for Ethan to finish the exchange. It was over faster than the audience wanted. 3 arena fighters lay beaten in the sand. The humans were still standing. Owen was bleeding from the side. Mason was breathing too hard. Sarah was already pressing cloth against Owen's wound. Ethan stood over the last opponent, blade in hand, waiting to see if the gates would open or if the owners would cheat. The crowd did not cheer at first. They did not understand what they had seen. The humans had not fought like gladiators. They had fought like people who had already lost everything and were deciding what could still be protected. Director Voss's smile faded only slightly. Interest replaced amusement. Prince Kalen looked down at the sand and felt shame settle under his ribs. The announcer recovered first. The humans survive round 1. The crowd finally roared, louder than before. Ethan looked at the royal boxes, then at the cameras, then at the blood on his stolen blade. He said nothing, but every viewer in the arena understood one thing. They had paid to watch humans die. Instead, the humans had taught them the show would cost more than money. The humans expected to be thrown back into their cells immediately after the match. Instead, the arena kept them waiting in a holding corridor beneath the stands while technicians, guards, and camera crews rushed past them. The noise from above still shook dust from the ceiling. Millions of spectators were still talking about what they had seen. For the first time since their capture, the humans had become something valuable. Mason sat against the wall with his spear resting across his knees. "Good news," he said. "We're famous now." Nobody answered. He looked at Sarah. Sarah ignored him while tightening a fresh bandage around Owen's side. Mason looked at Mara. Mara stared at the opposite wall. Finally, he looked at Ethan. "You're all making celebrity status look surprisingly depressing." Ethan remained standing near the corridor gate. His eyes never stopped moving, watching, counting, measuring. The habits of a soldier who had spent too long surviving. A guard approached carrying a metal case. Medical treatment. Sarah immediately stepped forward. The guard opened the case and tossed several supplies onto the floor. Not enough. Not even close. Just enough to keep prisoners alive for another match. Sarah's expression hardened. "This isn't treatment," the guard shrugged. "It isn't supposed to be." Then he walked away. Sarah crouched beside the supplies. "Cheap antiseptic." She picked up another packet. "Low-grade clotting foam." Another. "Bandages designed for civilians." Mason leaned forward. "So what you're saying is they care deeply about our well-being?" Sarah looked at him. "No, just checking." Owen let out a tired breath that sounded suspiciously close to laughter. Ethan noticed. For the first time since entering the arena, he saw Owen's shoulders relax slightly, just for a moment. Then the older man winced from the pain. The moment disappeared. A loudspeaker crackled overhead. "Human Unit 7 report to transfer processing." Mason looked up. "Human Unit 7. He shook his head. "My mother spent 9 hours choosing my name." Nobody responded. A second announcement followed. "Human Unit 7 report immediately." The gate opened. Shock collars activated. The humans stood. Ethan moved first. The others followed. The corridor eventually opened into a transport chamber lined with reinforced glass. Beyond the glass stood spectators, dozens of them, rich spectators, investors, nobles, tourists. They were looking at the humans the same way people examined expensive animals. One alien pressed a hand against the glass. "That's the one. The quiet one." Ethan Ward. Another nodded. "The one who dropped the arena fighter." "Humans are uglier than I expected." Mason looked at the glass. "I heard that." The alien blinked. "You understood me." Unfortunately. Several spectators laughed. Ethan kept walking. He hated this more than the arena. In the arena, at least people were honest. Here they pretended curiosity made exploitation respectable. High above the transport level, Prince Kalen watched the procession from a private balcony. His advisor stood beside him. You should not concern yourself with prisoners. Kalen never looked away from the humans. They are prisoners, not animals. The advisor hesitated. Many would disagree. Many are wrong. The advisor wisely stopped talking. Meanwhile, Director Voss stood inside the Central Operations Tower reviewing revenue figures. An assistant approached. Attendance projections have increased 31%, Voss smiled. As expected, the humans are attracting attention. The assistant hesitated. There is one concern. Voss turned. The audience appears unusually attached to the group. Explain. Normally viewers choose individual favorites. They seem interested in all five. Voss considered that. Interesting. Very interesting. Groups were harder to manipulate. Groups created loyalty. Loyalty created problems. Separate them. The assistant looked surprised. For the next match? No, for every match. Back in the transport chamber, the humans were finally led toward new holding quarters. The cell block was larger than before. Cleaner too. Success brought privileges. Not because the arena cared, because profitable prisoners needed maintenance. The door sealed behind them. For the first time all day, they were alone. Sarah immediately began checking supplies. Mara inspected the room. Owen sat heavily on one of the lower bunks. Ethan moved toward the only window, a thick barrier overlooking part of the arena. Mason stretched his arms. Well, could be worse. Ethan closed his eyes. Mason noticed. See, there it is again. Nobody asked what he meant, so he answered anyway. Every time things get quiet, you disappear. Ethan slowly turned. The room immediately became tense. Sarah looked up. Mara stopped moving. Even Owen paid attention. Mason didn't back down. You're here, but you're not. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Ethan spoke. When the colony fell, where were you? Mason frowned. What? Answer the question. The room stayed quiet. Mason shifted uncomfortably. I was in maintenance. Ethan nodded. I was in the evacuation sector. His voice remained calm. Too calm. The first building collapsed at 8:14. The second at 8:26. The third held long enough for civilians to reach the transports. Nobody interrupted. I remember every minute. Every word felt heavy. Deliberate, controlled. The sounds, the smoke, the people we couldn't save. His eyes locked onto Mason. So forgive me if I don't have room for jokes. The room fell silent. For a moment it looked like Mason might finally argue. Instead he nodded once. Fair enough. Then he sat down. No joke, no comeback, nothing. That surprised everyone, especially Ethan. The loudspeaker activated again before anybody could continue. Attention! Next combat trials will begin tomorrow. The human prisoners have been selected for feature broadcast coverage. Mason groaned. Feature coverage? That's somehow worse than celebrity status. This time Owen actually laughed. A short, rough sound. Gone almost immediately, but real. Mason pointed triumphantly. There, I got one. Sarah rolled her eyes. Mara shook her head. Even Ethan looked away from the window. Outside, the lights of the arena burned through the darkness. Thousands of workers prepared tomorrow's spectacle. Millions of viewers discussed their bets. Director Voss planned new ways to profit. And somewhere above it all, Prince Kalen watched reports from the holding block and wondered why the humans looked less like defeated prisoners and more like people trying desperately to remember how to remain human. For the first time since their capture, someone in power was paying attention. Unfortunately for the arena, it would not be the last. The arena owners quickly learned something unexpected about humans. The audience did not simply want to watch them fight. They wanted to watch them survive. Every new broadcast involving the human prisoners broke viewership records. Every arena discussion eventually returned to Ethan Ward and his group. Investors were pleased. Director Voss was pleased. The commentators were pleased. The humans themselves were not. 3 days after their first match, the holding block door opened before dawn. 8 guards entered. That alone told Ethan something was wrong. Arena guards never sent 8 men for routine transport. On your feet, the lead guard ordered. The human stood. Mason looked around. 8 guards, he nodded thoughtfully. Either were very important or somebody misplaced a tank. Nobody laughed, not even him. The guards separated them immediately. Sarah was taken one direction, Owen another, Mara another, Mason another. Ethan remained where he was. The lead guard stepped forward. "You're coming alone." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "For what?" The guard smiled. "Entertainment." An hour later, Ethan stood inside a new section of the arena. This one was different, smaller, closer, built for wealthy spectators. Private viewing chambers overlooked the fighting floor from every angle. People were eating expensive meals while discussing prisoner survival odds. Ethan stared at them. One noble noticed, "Look at that. The human understands he's being watched." Another laughed. "They always do." Ethan looked away. Some things weren't worth his attention. High above the arena, Prince Kalen sat in one of the observation galleries. His advisor stood nearby. They moved the humans to premium events. Kalen already knew. The reports had arrived hours ago. "They're profitable." "Yes," the advisor hesitated. "Is that surprising?" "No." Kalen looked down toward the arena floor. "The surprising part is how comfortable everyone seems with it." The advisor wisely remained silent. Meanwhile, Ethan's opponent entered, a massive reptilian fighter. Scars covered most of his body. The crowd cheered immediately. They knew him, a veteran, an arena favorite. The reptilian studied Ethan for several seconds. Then he spoke. "You are the human." Ethan said nothing. The reptilian nodded. "Good." Then he charged. The fight was brutal, not because Ethan enjoyed violence, not because he wanted revenge, simply because losing meant death. The reptilian was stronger, larger, more experienced in arena combat. But Ethan had spent years fighting wars where mistakes buried entire squads. Eventually, experience won. The reptilian collapsed. The match ended. The crowd exploded with excitement. Ethan did not celebrate. He simply walked toward the exit. That caught Kalen's attention more than the fight itself. Most victors acknowledged applause. Most acknowledged survival. Ethan acted like neither mattered. Later that evening, Kalen did something his advisors strongly discouraged. He visited the lower maintenance levels. Officially, he was inspecting arena infrastructure. Unofficially, he wanted answers. The lower sections were different from the public areas. Gone were the bright lights. Gone were the elegant decorations. Gone were the smiling attendants. Down here, everything smelled like chemicals and old metal. A supervisor hurried beside him. "Your Highness, these sections are normally restricted." Kalen continued walking. "I noticed." They passed holding cells, medical stations, storage rooms. Then they passed a recovery chamber. Kalen stopped. Several injured prisoners sat inside. Not humans. Various species. Some looked exhausted. Some looked terrified. One looked barely conscious. A medic was working through them alone. Kalen frowned. "One medic?" The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. "Resources are allocated according to profitability." Kalen slowly turned. The supervisor immediately regretted speaking. Profitability. The prince repeated the word carefully, as if testing whether it tasted as ugly as it sounded. Then something else caught his attention. Inside the room, Sarah Holt was helping the medic. Not because anyone ordered her, not because she benefited, simply because she saw injured people. The medic pointed toward a wounded prisoner. Sarah immediately moved over. "What happened?" "Collapsed lung." Sarah knelt beside the patient. "Do you have a decompression kit?" The medic blinked. "You know what that is." "I'm a doctor." The medic handed her the equipment. Together they started working. Kalen watched through the observation window. "She isn't human." The supervisor looked confused. "Of course she's human. Then why is she helping them?" The supervisor had no answer. Neither did Kalen. Back in the holding block, Ethan sat alone near the window. The arena lights glowed across the distant skyline. The door opened. Mason entered first, then Owen, then Mara, finally Sarah. Everyone looked exhausted. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Mason sat down heavily. "I've reached a conclusion." Nobody responded. "The food is trying to kill us." Sarah sighed. "It's food." "No." Mason pointed toward his tray. "That's an assassination attempt disguised as vegetables." Owen shook his head. "There aren't any vegetables." "Exactly." Mason looked vindicated. For some reason that finally earned a small laugh from Mara. The first one Ethan had heard from her since their capture. Mason pointed immediately. "See, I'm helping morale." Mara rolled her eyes. "Don't get carried away." But the corner of her mouth remained slightly raised. Ethan watched quietly. He still didn't understand how Mason could joke after everything. Part of him didn't want to understand. The other part wondered if maybe he was afraid too. A loud announcement interrupted the moment. The arena's central speaker system activated. "Attention spectators. Tomorrow's featured event will include Human Unit 7. The room immediately went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Featured events were larger, deadlier, more profitable. Sarah looked toward Ethan. "They'll keep escalating." "Yeah." Owen folded his arms. "They want ratings." Mason leaned back against the wall. "Well, if we're becoming famous, I'd appreciate better accommodations." Nobody reacted. Mason nodded. Tough crowd. Outside their cell, unseen by any of them, a young royal stood in a dark observation corridor reviewing reports. For the first time since arriving at the arena, Prince Kalen was no longer interested in the humans because they were human. He was interested because the more he learned about them, the harder it became to understand why they were prisoners, and the easier it became to understand that something inside the arena itself was deeply wrong. By the fourth week, the arena had stopped pretending the humans were ordinary prisoners. Their faces appeared on advertisements. Their matches received prime broadcast slots. Merchants sold miniature figures modeled after them. Commentators debated human combat psychology for entire programs. And through all of it, the humans hated every second. The attention did not improve their lives. It only increased their value, which meant the arena owners became even more determined to keep them alive just long enough to make more money. Ethan understood that before anyone else. "They're not trying to kill us anymore," he said one evening. The group sat inside their holding block after another match. Mason frowned. "That sounds like good news." "It isn't." Sarah looked up from cleaning a wound on Mara's arm. "You think they're planning something?" Ethan nodded. "They're investing." The room became quiet. Nobody liked that explanation, because it made sense. Owen sat heavily on the lower bunk. "The moment prisoners become assets, somebody starts protecting the investment and exploiting it," Mara added. Ethan stared through the small observation window. Exactly. The next morning proved him right. A new announcement spread through the arena. Human Unit 7 would no longer participate in random matches. From now on, every appearance would be a featured event. Every fight would be broadcast sector-wide. Every result would affect betting markets. The audience loved it. The humans did not. Meanwhile, Prince Kalen sat inside a private conference chamber listening to investors discuss the arena's future. "The humans are exceptional. The ratings are exceptional. The profits are exceptional." One investor smiled. "We should acquire more." Kalen's jaw tightened. "They are prisoners." The room turned toward him. An older noble laughed softly. "Of course they are." The prince felt his patience slipping. "No, they are people." Several nobles exchanged amused looks. One finally shrugged. "Your Highness, sentiment does not generate revenue." Kalen stood. Neither did dignity, apparently. Then he left before he said something worse. Later that day, he found himself walking through the lower maintenance sectors again. Not because he had official business, because he could no longer ignore what he had seen. The arena looked very different away from the cameras. Workers moved quickly. Guards treated prisoners harshly. Medical supplies were rationed. Food quality depended entirely on profitability scores. Everything had a price. Everything. A maintenance worker nearly collided with him at a corridor intersection. The man immediately froze. "Your Highness." Kalen waved him off. Then he noticed the datapad the worker had dropped. Prisoner schedules, transfer routes, security rotations, information the prince technically shouldn't have. He picked it up. The worker looked terrified. Kalen studied the screen for several seconds, then handed it back. "Be more careful." The worker nodded rapidly and disappeared. But the prince had already memorized several entries, including the humans. That night Ethan woke to alarms. Not arena alarms. Internal security alarms. The entire holding block lit red. Guards ran through nearby corridors. Doors sealed, systems locked down. Mason sat upright immediately. That sounds expensive. Mara was already on her feet. Sarah moved toward the door. What happened? Nobody knew. The answer arrived 20 minutes later. Another prisoner unit had attempted escape. The attempt failed. Badly. The next day, the arena publicly displayed the consequences. Every prisoner watched. Every spectator watched. The message was simple. Escape equals death. Ethan stood motionless through the entire presentation. Mason stopped making jokes. Even he couldn't find one. Afterward, the humans returned to their cell in complete silence. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Owen broke it. They wanted us scared. Ethan nodded. Are you? Owen looked away. Yeah, the honesty surprised nobody. Mara folded her arms. So am I. Sarah sat down slowly. Me too. Nobody looked ashamed. Fear was normal. Fear was honest. What mattered was what happened next. The door suddenly opened. A guard stepped inside. Transfer order. Everyone froze. The guard pointed directly at Owen. You, the older man stood. What for? The guard smiled. Special event. Every instinct Ethan possessed screamed that something was wrong. He stepped forward. The shock collar activated instantly. Pain shot through his neck. The guard laughed. Careful, human. Ethan ignored him. When does he come back? The guard's smile disappeared. He doesn't ask questions. Then Owen was gone. The door closed behind him. The silence afterward felt wrong, heavy, dangerous. Sarah looked pale. Mara looked furious. Mason stared at the floor. For the first time since Ethan had known him, he said absolutely nothing. Hours passed. Then a full day. Then another. Owen never returned. The arena never explained. The guards never answered questions. His name simply vanished from the schedule. The empty bunk remained. That somehow made it worse. 3 nights later, a small maintenance drone appeared outside the human cell. Unusual. Maintenance drones never visited occupied blocks. The machine stopped near the observation window, then dropped something. A folded data strip. Mara immediately grabbed it. The drone left. Gone before security cameras completed their sweep. The humans gathered around. Sarah unfolded the strip. Inside was a simple map. Maintenance corridors, blind camera zones, security checkpoints, and one short message. Not all eyes support this place. No signature. No identification. Nothing. Mason looked around. That's definitely suspicious. Ethan studied the map. Someone inside the arena was helping them. Not enough to escape. Not yet, but enough to survive. Sarah looked toward the window. Who would risk this? Far above the arena, Prince Kalen stood alone in his chambers. The copied map files were already deleted. The transmission records erased. His hands rested against the balcony rail. He knew the risks. If discovered, he could lose everything. But Owen's disappearance had settled something inside him. The humans were not the problem. The arena was. Back inside the holding block, Ethan carefully folded the map. For the first time in weeks, he felt something unfamiliar. Not hope. Hope was too dangerous, but possibility. And sometimes that was enough. Outside, the arena lights continued to burn. The crowds continued to cheer. The owners continued to profit. But somewhere inside the machine, small cracks were beginning to form. And eventually, every prison discovered that cracks could become exits. The arena wasted no time capitalizing on Owen's disappearance. Within 2 days, every advertisement across the station showed the same image. Ethan Ward standing beneath the arena lights while a massive shadow loomed behind him. The caption was simple: Human versus Champion, one survivor. Millions purchased access before the event even began. Commentators spent entire broadcasts discussing Ethan's chances. Most agreed on one thing. The human had survived far longer than expected, but nobody defeated Drogoth. Drogoth had been the arena's champion for almost 7 years. He belonged to a predator species from the outer sectors and stood nearly a full head taller than most competitors. Entire teams had failed to bring him down. Arena management loved him because he generated profits. Spectators loved him because he generated fear. The humans sat together inside their holding block watching the promotional broadcasts on a wall screen. Mason stared at Drogoth's image. Good news. Nobody responded. Mason pointed at the screen. He only looks like he could eat a transport shuttle. Sarah rubbed her eyes. Mason, what? You know that's not helping. I disagree. Sarah looked at him. Mason shrugged. I help morale. Mara snorted. Poorly. For the first time in days, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Then the feeling disappeared. The empty bunk across the room caught his attention. Owen's bunk. Still untouched. Still waiting. The arena had never explained what happened to him. That silence bothered Ethan more than any threat. The door opened suddenly. A guard entered. Human. Everyone immediately knew which human he meant. Ethan. The guard pointed toward the corridor. Champion preparation. Sarah stood. So early? The guard smiled. The audience paid extra. Ethan followed without another word. The preparation chamber turned out to be nothing more than another holding room beneath the arena floor. A reinforced barrier divided the room into two sections. Ethan entered one side. Several seconds later, another door opened. Drogoth entered the other. The giant predator walked slowly toward the barrier. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Drogoth sat down, not aggressively, not threateningly. Simply sat. That surprised Ethan. Drogoth studied him carefully. You are smaller than I expected. Ethan leaned against the wall. You're uglier than I expected. The champion stared. Then a low rumbling sound escaped his chest. Laughter. Actual laughter. The stories were true. What stories? That humans say stupid things when afraid. Ethan looked at him. I'm not afraid. Drogoth nodded. That part was also in the stories. Silence followed. The arena cameras watched from above, recording everything. Eventually Drogoth spoke again. You know they want me to kill you. Ethan shrugged. They've wanted that for weeks. The champion's eyes narrowed. Most competitors beg. Then most competitors are smarter than me. Another rumble of amusement. For the first time in years, Drogoth found himself interested in an opponent. Meanwhile, high above the arena, Prince Kaelin watched security reports from his private office. The information he had provided was helping. Only slightly, but helping. The map routes, the blind spots, the patrol schedules. The humans now understood parts of the station that ordinary prisoners never saw. Still not enough to escape. Not yet. His advisor entered quietly. Your Highness. Kaelin closed the report. What is it? The champion event begins in 2 hours. The advisor hesitated. You should not involve yourself further. Kaelin looked toward the arena through the window. And if I don't, the advisor sighed. Then eventually someone will discover what you've been doing. Kaelin already knew that. The problem was that he no longer cared as much as he should. Back in the holding block, Sarah unfolded the map again. Mara stood beside her. The maintenance route ends here. She pointed toward a junction near the docking sectors. Sarah nodded. We still need transport access, and security clearance, and luck. Mason looked up. Luck would be nice. Ethan wasn't there to hear the conversation. Part of Sarah was grateful, the other part worried. Every day Ethan seemed more distant, more focused, more dangerous. As if he had already accepted he wasn't leaving the arena alive. 2 hours later, the arena lights ignited. The crowd roared. Billions watched across dozens of systems. Director Voss stood proudly in his private viewing suite. This was the event he had wanted. The human phenomenon. The unbeatable champion. Perfect entertainment. The announcer's voice exploded through the arena. Citizens of the sectors, welcome to the greatest match in arena history. The gates opened. Drogoth entered first. The crowd erupted immediately. Then Ethan walked onto the sand. The reaction surprised everyone. Half the arena cheered, not because they liked him, because they wanted to see what happened next. The match began. The opening exchanges were brutal, not theatrical, not flashy, just two experienced survivors testing each other. The crowd quickly realized something strange. Drogoth wasn't fighting like he normally did. The champion wasn't trying to end the match quickly. He was studying Ethan, learning him, understanding him. Several times they separated. Several times they circled. The tension became unbearable. Eventually Drogoth spoke loudly enough for nearby microphones to capture it. Why do you keep fighting? Ethan wiped blood from his face. Because the alternative is dying. The champion shook his head. No, that's everybody. He pointed toward the royal boxes. "I'm asking about you." The crowd fell silent. Ethan stared at him. For several seconds he considered saying nothing. Then he answered. "Because they took everything." Drogoth waited. "My family, my home, my people." Ethan's voice remained steady. "I don't get to quit after that." The champion looked at him for a long moment. Then something changed. Not friendship, not sympathy, respect, real respect. The kind earned only through suffering. The fight continued, hard, exhausting, relentless. Neither man surrendered. Neither man backed away. When it finally ended, both barely remained standing. The arena waited. The cameras waited. Director Voss leaned forward eagerly. Then Drogoth did something nobody expected. He lowered his head, not in defeat, in acknowledgement, a warrior's respect. The crowd gasped. Voss stood up immediately, furious. The champion turned away from Ethan and walked toward his exit gate. The officials declared Ethan the winner. The audience exploded into chaos. Some cheered, some argued, some demanded explanations, but Ethan barely heard any of it. As medics approached, his eyes drifted upward toward the highest sections of the station, toward the docks, toward freedom. For the first time since his capture, the arena no longer felt impossible. Somewhere inside the machine, people were helping, the prints, the maps, the cracks in the system. And now even the champion had disrupted the arena's plans. The opportunity wasn't here yet, but it was coming, and Ethan intended to be ready when it arrived. The arena was louder than ever after Ethan's victory over Drogoth. The broadcasts played continuously across the station. Commentators argued about the match. Spectators debated whether the champion had truly lost or simply chosen not to finish the fight. Investors demanded explanations. Director Voss demanded results. For the first time since the humans arrived, the arena was struggling to control its own story. The humans cared about none of that. They cared about the map. The updated route appeared 2 days later. Another maintenance drone, another security blind spot, another data strip. This one included docking schedules. Sarah studied it immediately. Mara checked the patrol routes. Mason stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he whistled. "Well, that's definitely illegal." Ethan looked over the information. The route wasn't perfect. There were still risks, too many risks. But for the first time, escape looked possible. Not probable, not safe, possible. Sarah pointed toward a highlighted section. "Cargo Dock 12. Mara nodded. "Lowest security coverage. The maintenance corridor connects here." Mason pointed to another section. "And then we somehow politely borrow a starship." Nobody answered. Mason sighed. "Tough crowd until the very end." The plan came together over the next several days. Small pieces, careful pieces. The kind built by people who knew mistakes got people killed. The arena remained distracted. Viewership numbers were exploding. Director Voss focused entirely on profits. The station focused entirely on Ethan. That gave the humans room to move. Not much. Enough. Far above the arena, Prince Kalen stood inside a private observation room staring out across the station. His advisor entered quietly. "You helped them again." It wasn't a question. Kalen didn't bother denying it. The advisor closed the door. "If this is discovered, I know, you could lose your title. I know, you could lose more than that." Kalen finally turned. "They are prisoners." The advisor looked exhausted. "We've had this conversation." "No," Kalen shook his head. "We've avoided it." The advisor remained silent. Kalen looked back toward the station lights. "A civilization should not be measured by how it treats the powerful. It should be measured by how it treats people who cannot fight back." The advisor had no response. Neither of them noticed the sadness in Kalen's expression. Because the prince already knew something. He was helping the humans leave, but he wasn't helping Owen. Whatever happened to the older human remained buried somewhere inside the arena. That failure would stay with him. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A station-wide celebration was scheduled to honor the arena's record profits. Half the security staff would be reassigned. Crowd density would increase. Monitoring would decrease. It was the best chance they were ever going to get. The night arrived. The humans waited. Nobody spoke much. Everyone understood what was at stake. Finally, the cell door opened for routine transfer. The guards escorted them into the corridor. The moment they passed the first maintenance junction, Mara moved. Fast, precise. A stolen access key opened the service hatch. The humans disappeared inside before the guards even realized anything was wrong. Alarms began several minutes later. The maintenance corridors stretched through the station like metal arteries. Narrow, dark, complicated. Exactly what they needed. Sarah led using the map. Mara watched behind them. Ethan stayed near the rear, protecting everyone else. As always, the first security team appeared near Cargo Sector 8. The humans immediately diverted through a secondary route. The second team nearly caught them near a maintenance lift. Only a power outage saved them. A power outage that mysteriously affected several nearby security systems at the exact right moment. Prince Kalen never admitted responsibility. Nobody asked. By the time they reached Cargo Dock 12, the station was in chaos. Security alerts echoed everywhere. Ships were grounded. Personnel scrambled. The arena finally understood what was happening. The humans had stopped performing. They were leaving. The docking bay stood open ahead of them. One transport remained connected to the station. Small, civilian, perfect. Mason stared at it. "I love that ship. You've never seen it before," Sarah said. "I love it anyway." For the first time in weeks, she actually smiled. A small one, but real. The transport ramp lowered. Freedom stood only meters away. Then security forces appeared at the far end of the bay, weapons raised, blocking the route. Nobody moved. The distance felt impossible. Then another voice echoed through the docking chamber. "Stand down." Every head turned. Prince Kalen walked into the bay accompanied by station security officers. The commander looked stunned. "Your Highness." Kalen never looked away from the humans. "Stand down." The commander hesitated. "They are escaped prisoners. They are leaving." The commander stared. "You are ordering this?" Kalen took a slow breath. "Yes." The security officers slowly lowered their weapons. Nobody understood what they were seeing, least of all the humans. Kalen looked toward Ethan. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally Ethan nodded once. A soldier's acknowledgement, nothing more. Kalen returned it. The humans boarded the transport. The ramp began to rise. As the engines powered up, Mason dropped into one of the passenger seats and let out a long breath. "We're alive." Nobody answered. The realization hadn't arrived yet. The ship detached from the station. Slowly, then faster. The arena disappeared behind them. The station lights grew distant. For the first time in months there were no collars, no guards, no cameras, no spectators, only silence. Several hours later, Ethan sat alone near one of the observation windows staring into space. The stars stretched endlessly ahead. A soft sound made him turn. Mason lowered himself into the seat beside him. For once he wasn't smiling. For once he didn't have a joke ready. The silence lasted a long time. Then Ethan spoke first. "I owe you an apology." Mason looked surprised. "For what?" "I was harder on you than I should have been." Mason stared out at the stars. "Maybe," Ethan nodded. "I thought you didn't care." That earned a small laugh. Not a happy one. Mason rubbed his hands together. "You know why I kept joking?" Ethan looked at him. "No." For several seconds Mason said nothing. Then he finally answered. "Because every time I stopped," his voice grew quieter, "I remembered my wife." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything either of them had experienced inside the arena. Ethan looked away. Not because he didn't understand, because he understood perfectly. After a while he nodded. "I know," Mason laughed softly. "Yeah, you probably do." Neither man spoke again. They simply sat there watching the stars. Behind them the survivors slept. Ahead of them waited an uncertain future. The arena was gone. The war wasn't over. Humanity was still scattered, still wounded, still fighting. But for the first time in a very long time they were free. And sometimes freedom was enough to keep moving forward.